This is NTD Evening News. Live from our NTD Global Headquarters in New York City, here is Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening and thank you for joining us tonight. The Israeli military announced that its forces have recovered the bodies of 3 hostages from Gaza. IDF chief military spokesperson says the bodies have been identified and their families have been informed. NTD's Fiona G brings us the details, and just a warning, some viewers may find the content of this report disturbing.
Israel's security agency Shin Bet recovered the bodies of 23-year-old Shani Luke, 57-year-old Itzhak Gelenter, and 28-year-old Amit Buskila. The 3 were attending the Nova Music Festival when Hamas launched their October 7th attack. They were killed and their bodies taken to the Gaza Strip by the terrorist group.
They were celebrating life in the Nova Music Festival and they were murdered by Hamas. Their bodies were transferred to medical professionals for forensic examination and identification. Our hearts go out to them, to the families, at this difficult time. We will leave no stone unturned. We will do everything in our power to find our hostages and bring them home. We will not rest until we do.
A photo of Hamas terrorists parading Shani Luke's lifeless body in a truck after October 7th sent shockwaves around the world. It is believed that Hamas is still holding 129 hostages captive. Meanwhile, humanitarian aid is flowing into Gaza today through a temporary pier built by the U.S. military, according to the U.S. Central Command. This is the first time aid has been sent to the war-torn region by sea in 2 months. President Biden announced his plan to build the pier off the coast of Gaza in early March. U.S. troops began construction in April. The floating pier and causeway were anchored on Gaza's beach yesterday. The trucks entering Gaza carry aid supplied from various different countries and organizations. No American troops entered Gaza. The U.S. military has emphasized that it will only provide logistical support for the delivery of aid. Fiona G., NTD News.
The cleanup from a deadly storm system is underway in Texas. Tens of thousands of people remain without power as the storms toppled trees onto power lines, homes, and vehicles. NTD's Dave Martin has the latest.
The storm system tore through parts of the Lone Star State Thursday with hurricane-force winds. Those winds knocked down trees and power lines into people's homes and cars. Houston's schools are closed, and city workers, except for those who are essential, are being told to stay home today. Houston Mayor John Whitmire says downtown is a mess and for people to stay home and take care of their children. Power was out for more than 1 million electricity customers Friday morning, and flooding is adding to the slow cleanup efforts. The storm system also wreaked havoc across the Gulf Coast states, from Louisiana through southern Alabama and into Florida. Emergency management workers are telling people they should expect to be without power for several days as repair crews work to clear debris and restore power. This is the second major storm to move through the Gulf Coast states in recent weeks, as Houston suffered from extreme flooding earlier this month. This is Dave Martin for NTD News.
The man convicted of attacking former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband with a hammer in his home is sentenced to 30 years in prison. Defense attorneys argued the man was motivated by his political beliefs. NTD's Eileen Ang has the story.
Judge Jacqueline Scott Corley sentenced 44-year-old David DePape on Friday to 30 years in prison. He was convicted of attempting to kidnap then House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and attacking her husband, Paul Pelosi, with a hammer. The attack was captured on police body camera video. DePape admitted during trial testimony that he broke into the Pelosi's San Francisco home in October 2022, intending to hold the speaker hostage and, quote, break her kneecaps if she lied to him. He also admitted to attacking Paul Pelosi with a hammer after police showed up, saying his plan to end what he viewed as government corruption was unraveling. Last November, jurors found him guilty. Prosecutors had asked for a 40-year prison term. DePape was given 20 years for one count and 30 years for another count. The sentences will run concurrently. He was also given credit for the 18 months that he's been in custody. Defense attorneys argued DePape was motivated by his political beliefs, not because he wanted to interfere with Nancy Pelosi's official duties as a member of Congress, making the charges against him invalid.
The court's sentence will ensure that DePape will not be able to use violence to pollute the political process. Robust, passionate political debate is appropriate and often necessary in our democracy. But today's sentence is a stern reminder that political discourse must never transform into violence.
The attack on Paul Pelosi, who was 82 at the time, happened just days before the midterm elections. He suffered 2 head wounds, including a skull fracture that was mended with plates and screws he will have for the rest of his life. His right arm and hand were also injured.
President Biden in full swing to reclaim black support. That says new polling shows black voters abandoning Biden. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao brings us the story.
President Biden is making a flurry of appeal to reach black voters. It comes as a New York Times poll this week shows that Biden's support among black voters is down 20% compared with 2020. That's driven by issues like the economy and the war in Gaza. Here's President Biden today trying to appeal to that group by targeting his 2024 rival on the issue of diversity.
And black history is American history. An extreme movement led by my predecessor and his MAGA Republican allies, backed by an extreme Supreme Court, gutted affirmative action in college admissions. They want a country for some, not for all.
And that was President Biden marking the 70th anniversary of a landmark Supreme Court case that ended school desegregation. And this weekend, Biden will also be speaking in Detroit and also be making a commencement address at Morehouse College, a historically black university. The speech is already sparking controversy as protests over the war in Gaza are expected to happen during his speech. The White House today saying Biden will try to strike the right tone. Watch.
He's been working on these remarks for the past couple days. I can assure you, with his senior advisors, he's taking this incredibly seriously, and he understands, as the president tends to do, meet the moment that we're in.
Meanwhile, Trump, on his day off from court today, attended his youngest son's high school graduation and is speaking in Minnesota, a traditionally blue state he's vowing to flip. He also announced he's accepting a VP debate by Fox and a 4th presidential debate by NBC and Telemundo. But President Biden's campaign has said President Biden would only do 2 debates, accusing Trump of playing games with debates. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
A big day for the Trump family. Former President Trump today attended his youngest son's high school graduation in South Florida. Judge Juan Merchan granted Trump a day off from his so-called hush money trial in Manhattan to attend the ceremony. All planned trial proceedings were called off for the day. Trump's son Barron crossed the stage for his diploma in dark blue graduation robes, a graduation cap, and a red sash. Trump was seen grinning and waving alongside his wife Melania. He has said that Barron is a very good student with an interest in politics. Barron was recently chosen as one of Florida's delegates at the RNC convention this summer. The historic trial of former President Trump is winding down to its conclusion, as prosecutors have said Michael Cohen is their last witness. Cohen will complete his testimony on Monday. Afterwards, both sides will prepare for closing arguments. Our legal correspondent Arlene Richards breaks down key moments in the trial.
For several weeks, the 45th President of the United States has sat in what he called a very cold courtroom to listen to witnesses who helped the prosecution bring its case to life. Prosecutors have called 19 witnesses to convince the jury that former President Trump committed a crime by authorizing Michael Cohen to pay Stormy Daniels a $130,000 payoff in exchange for her silence, then trying to hide it after he was elected, calling it a hush money scheme. This is a case about falsifying checks and invoices. But the DA is also trying to convince the jury that the so-called scheme is illegal. The indictment accuses Trump of falsely signing checks as if they were income when he was really reimbursing Cohen for paying Daniels. Some witnesses have told stories that could threaten the former president's future. David Pecker, the ex-publisher of a popular tabloid newspaper, kicked off the story with brutal testimony about a catch-and-kill scheme. He said he spoke to Trump and Cohen before the 2016 election and agreed to purchase negative stories about Trump. On cross-examination, Pecker testified that it was standard operating procedure for him to control the release of a story. So blocking negative stories about Trump was not a new idea. Stormy Daniels, the former adult film actress who says she still does strip shows for a living, adding some color to the proceedings. She testified that Trump asked her to dinner, but she initially said no. On cross-examination, she admitted to telling an interviewer who would pass up an opportunity to talk to someone so interesting. Daniels' detailed testimony about having a one-night stand with Trump didn't help the jury understand how he allegedly falsified business records. The prosecution used Michael Cohen for that. Cohen said he sent Trump false invoices containing a note that said pursuant to the retainer agreement. But he testified there wasn't any agreement. Yet he said Trump paid him like it was income. Cohen said the checks were really reimbursement for his payoff to Daniels. On cross-examination, Cohen admitted he was an employee of the Trump organization for years and he didn't need a retainer agreement. Cohen is the sole link to President Trump's involvement in an alleged records cover-up. The jury's decision may well hinge on whether they believe Cohen's story or whether they believe he's lying. The presiding judge, Juan Merchan, for his part, has been pushing the case along at a rapid speed, telling the attorneys on Thursday to be prepared to give their closing arguments by next Tuesday. Meanwhile, the defense is mulling over whether or not to call rebuttal witnesses. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Russian President Vladimir Putin wrapping up his state visit to China, and the two countries reaffirmed their no-limits partnership. Earlier, we spoke with retired Air Force Brigadier General Robert Spalding about the deepening ties between China and Russia. General Spalding is the former senior director for strategic planning at the White House National Security Council. General Spalding, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Thanks. Great to be back.
Now, Russia's Putin and China's Xi have deepened their no-limits partnership, saying this week that the two have entered a new era and that the U.S. has a, quote, Cold War mentality. Now, how do you read this no-limits partnership, and what does that mean in terms of U.S. foreign policy?
I find it kind of interesting, quite frankly, that they say that the United States has a Cold War mentality, because if anything, the relationship between Russia and China demonstrates that they have a Cold War mentality. I mean, the entire relationship is surrounding the fact that Russia invaded Ukraine, they were cut off from the global economy, and now their lifeline is China, who simultaneously gets energy from Russia. So if anything, they're demonstrating the fact that we are in a Cold War by, basically acting like we're in a Cold War. So it is kind of interesting that they would say that.
Expanding on that, many are noting that these two countries have different goals, that Russia wants more support from China, while China wants to balance its relationship with Russia and the West. Given that, where do you see this relationship going, since so many are calling Russia the junior partner to China?
Well, if you look at the tariffs that the Biden administration just put on China, I think what we're seeing is the beginnings of, what I've been calling for a long time, which is really cutting off China from the free world. And so, they're basically backing themselves into a corner, and the end result is going to be Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, all excluded from the global economy. And, all of these countries, Russia, North Korea, Iran, have been depending on China being plugged into the global economy. So I think it's going to end badly for all of them.
Now, in terms of energy, Russia's Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak is saying that the two countries are set to sign a Siberia 2 gas pipeline, which will carry Russian gas to China. What do you make of this gas pipeline announcement, especially given what we saw with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline sabotage?
Well, I think it's going to continue to strengthen the relationship between Russia and China. But as has been demonstrated by China's economy over the last couple of years, I mean, it's continuing to decline, and they do not have domestic consumption that is basically going to lift their economy. That's why they've been depending on exports. And, as they slowly get cut off, it's really, they're in the same situation as the Soviet Union was during the Cold War. Now, the good thing is China can get energy from Russia, but Russia's economy is, a fraction of China's, and they're not going to provide the consumption of Chinese goods that China really needs to grow its economy. So as they start to get cut off, particularly with these, beginning with these tariffs that the Biden administration has put on, but increasingly restrictions, trade restrictions, but also probably sanctions to go along, because they're supporting Russia's invasion of Ukraine. You're just going to see, what I believed from the very beginning is they're going to see a decline in their economy, very much like the Soviet Union experienced as they were cut off from the global economy. And, eventually, hopefully, someday, we'll see a China without the Chinese Communist Party.
President Biden made headlines this week for increasing the tariffs on Chinese EVs to 100%. Now, when it comes to EVs, there's a new report out by the International Energy Agency, or IEA, which says that China has developed a revolutionary electric car battery that can charge in 10 minutes and that it can travel 250 miles per charge. But the agency is raising concerns over China's dominance in the supply chain, especially in terms of the minerals and materials needed to make these batteries. Now, what is your reaction to this new report?
Well, I think even with the increase in EVs, it's not going to make much of a dent in the increase in global carbon emissions. A lot of that is coming from China's use of coal-fired energy. And that doesn't show any time slowing anytime soon. And so, honestly, I think we have to take a step back and see, what are we trying to achieve here? If the answer is that we're trying to make the environment, make the global environment safe, then just cutting off and tariffing EVs is not sufficient. I think cutting off consumption of exports from China should be our goal, because if you cut off consumption of those exports, then that coal-fired energy plants that the Chinese Communist Party are running in order to run the factories that produce those goods, they're going to have to shut down because they're going to have nowhere for the goods to go. So to me, if we were focusing on cutting off China's productive capacity, we'd be much more effective by cutting off consumption. We'd be much more effective at protecting the environment. I think EVs just really don't make a dent.
General Spalding, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
The cause of death for a Boeing whistleblower has been revealed. A coroner from Charleston, South Carolina said, quote, "The manner of death is best deemed suicide." Charleston police says there was no evidence of forced entry or physical struggle inside of the car, and there was a note that suggests Barnett was going through personal distress, which only has his fingerprints on it. 62-year-old John Barnett was found dead in a vehicle in March, on the same day he was supposed to testify about Boeing in court. There have been questions about his sudden death. His lawyers urged the county to investigate. The coroner's office has said he died from, quote, "what appears to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound." Barnett worked for 30 years at Boeing as a quality control engineer before retiring in 2017. He recently became a vocal critic of the company's safety and production quality practices. The results are in. Over 5,000 auto workers in Alabama have declined to join the United Auto Workers Union. NTD's Dave Martin has more.
5,000 auto workers at an Alabama Mercedes-Benz plant have declined to join the United Auto Workers Union, with 56% voting against. A huge loss for the union, which plans to spread throughout the Deep South, a place historically hostile to unions. This comes right after an historic union victory at a Volkswagen plant in Tennessee, where an overwhelming majority of auto workers voted pro-union. Labor experts say unions may ride this momentum to expand in the South. The United Auto Workers say they want to spread their union to all the car makers. In an online video, UAW President Shawn Fain says he's receiving an overwhelming response from workers at non-union companies.
Workers across the country, from the West to the Midwest, and especially in the South, are reaching out to join our movement.
The UAW currently has more than 400,000 active members in the United States, Canada, and Puerto Rico.
If you are a unionized worker, it is fantastic for you. It is not so good, though, for the people who do not get employed because of the existence of the union.
Economics lecturer Robert Wright says we have to look not just at what's seen, but also at what's unseen. This includes those who don't get employed because of higher labor costs, union hiring practices, union work rules, or union-created entry barriers.
And also higher costs for businesses, which might be passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices, or might be passed on to shareholders in the form of lower profits.
Mercedes-Benz rejected claims it prevented union organizing efforts in Alabama. It says it fully respects its team members' choice whether to unionize. This is Dave Martin for NTD News.
California is considering a pay-per-mile fee for drivers. The state is testing out a road charge system that charges all drivers, including those with electric vehicles. It could replace gas taxes as the state pushes for EV and hybrid vehicles. NTD's David Lamb reports.
As electric and hybrid vehicles are seen on the roads more, U.S. states say they've seen a drop in gas tax revenue. So they're researching per-mile fees. California is testing out its road charge pilot program. Drivers will be required to pay a fee each month depending on how many miles they drive. If it works out well, the per-mile system could eventually replace gas taxes. The pilot is a 6-month program from August 2024 to January 2025, and participants can earn up to $400 in gift cards and refunded all the gas taxes incurred. At least 3 other states already implemented a road charge system, such as Oregon, Utah, and Virginia. Many other states, such as Hawaii and Washington, are considering. States feel charging people for the miles they drive will equate to their fair share of paying for road repairs and wear and tear. According to California's Transportation Agency, around 80% of highway and road repairs are funded by a tax on gasoline charged at the pump when you buy gas. Californians pay about $300 a year in state gas taxes. NTD calculated the potential cost using the road charge calculator. The Transportation Department says the average American drives around 1,100 miles per month with an average miles per gallon of 24 mpg. And at 2 cents per mile, that could add up to $22 per month compared to $26 in fuel taxes. But it's unclear what the exact charge will be per mile, as lawmakers will have to decide that per state. Washington state had legislation considering charging 2.5 cents per mile. David Lamb, NTD News, California.
Trump's so-called hush money trial is on break today, so Trump could attend his son Barron's high school graduation. But the prosecution's star witness, Michael Cohen, will be back on the witness stand on Monday. Joining me now to discuss the latest developments in the trial is John Malcolm. He's the vice president of the Institute for Constitutional Government and the director of the Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies at the Heritage Foundation. John, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you. To begin, Trump's so-called hush money trial seems to be winding down, but a lot of attention is on the cross-examination of the prosecution's star witness, Michael Cohen, with MSNBC's legal correspondent Lisa Rubin saying the exchange over Cohen and his communications with Trump's former bodyguard Keith Schiller was, quote, a moment of real triumph for Trump's team. What do you make of the trial so far?
Well, it is certainly winding down, and the last few days have gone, I think, very well for former President Trump. I think his attorney, Todd Blanche, has done a very effective job at cross-examining Michael Cohen, who has admitted that every other time he's been under oath, he has lied. He said he hates Donald Trump. that he at one point said he was dying to get a job in the White House. And then he said, well, it really wasn't that important to me. He's contradicting himself all over the place. That call moment was very important. So Michael Cohen said that there was a call in late October of 2016 in which he spoke with Keith Schiller, who was President Trump's bodyguard, and President Trump. And that during that call, they discussed the payments to Stormy Daniels and what they were for and who was going to be reimbursed. And he specifically remembered that call. Well, Todd Blanche showed him text messages to Keith Schiller moments before that call took place, in which he said, there's a 14-year-old kid who is harassing me. I need to know what to do about it. And Schiller says, call me. And then Michael Cohen calls him, and the entirety of that telephone call takes 1 minute and 36 seconds. So in order to believe Michael Cohen, you would need to believe that Donald Trump was there at that moment, that they spoke about the 14-year-old harassing kid, and they had a substantive discussion about Stormy Daniels and the various payments that were going that way. So that was a very important moment for Donald Trump. At this point, I think the jury is going to be hard-pressed to believe Michael Cohen and, for that matter, Stormy Daniels, and they are the major witnesses against him.
Speaking of the jury, in your view, has Michael Cohen's testimony been enough for the DA to prove to the jury beyond a reasonable doubt that not only did former President Trump falsify business records, but that he did so to illegally conceal information from voters in order to influence the 2016 elections?
I don't think so. I mean, so look, Michael Cohen said wealthy businessmen enter into non-disclosure agreements all the time when they get stories like this, that this is not an unusual occurrence. There's nothing unlawful about that. There's even nothing unlawful about it trying to hide a bad story for somebody who is running for president. I just have a hard time seeing the prosecution getting a conviction here. It all depends on the testimony of Michael Cohen, and Michael Cohen has been impeached up one side and down the other. I mean, the supposed false statement was that he was being paid for legal representation. He said, well, I never had a retainer agreement with Donald Trump. But he also admitted that he did legal work for Donald Trump and for other family members over a period of several years, and that he never had a retainer agreement with any of them either. So I just, it's hard to predict. I'm not in the courtroom. I can't see the demeanor of the witnesses, but it certainly seems as if the state's major, key witnesses have been thoroughly impeached.
Expanding on that point, John, CNN's senior legal analyst Eli Honig said, I don't think I've ever seen a star cooperating witness get his knees chopped out quite as clearly and dramatically as what just happened with Michael Cohen. Now, has the cross-examination of Michael Cohen hurt the prosecution's case against Trump? What's your view on that?
Oh, I think severely. I mean, look, I suppose it's possible that Donald Trump will be convicted, but at this point, I think either an acquittal or a hung jury is a far more likely outcome. I think it would be very, very hard. I mean, so the prosecution called Stormy Daniels, and Stormy Daniels talked about, this relationship that she had with Donald Trump, all of these payments. Even Michael Cohen said that when that happened, he expressed the view that he thought that Stormy Daniels was extorting the former president. So even his key witnesses are undercutting each other. I don't know what a jury is to believe, but if they're going to try to convict the former president on the basis of Stormy Daniels's and Michael Cohen's testimony, I don't see how they can do that.
And what's next in this case? Then the judge has instructed the parties to prepare for summations to begin as early as Tuesday. The prosecution has said there will be no more witnesses on that side, suggesting next up is the defense team. But how is that? How much longer of a process are we looking at here?
Well, Todd Blanche has said that he's going to finish his cross-examination of Michael Cohen by mid-morning on Monday. The prosecution has said he needs about an hour of redirect. He's already said he's not going to call any other witnesses. So it really is just a question of what witnesses will the defense call. It's a real gamble putting former President Trump on the stand. I personally would advise against it, but I don't know what advice he has given to his client. He was going to call other witnesses, including former federal election commissioner Brad Smith, possibly Michael Cohen's former attorney. But, he might decide just to rest, given the fact that, in my opinion, he has eviscerated the state's main witness against President Trump, and just rely on the fact that there's no way this jury could convict him beyond a reasonable doubt.
John Malcolm, Vice President of the Institute for Constitutional Government and Director of the Meese Center for Legal and Judicial Studies at the Heritage Foundation, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Good to be with you.
Election integrity and immigration, hot topics of discussion at the Republican National Lawyers Association today. This year's theme centered around political assaults on the rule of law. NTD's Luis Martinez reports from Arlington, Virginia.
The Republican National Lawyers Association gathered in Arlington, Virginia this Friday to discuss how to uphold the rule of law. According to the president of the association, Michael Thielen, this year's conference will not focus on new legislation, but on how to execute existing ones.
And that's what we're fighting for, is the rule of law here. And the Biden administration has ignored the rule of law, whether it's ignoring the Supreme Court on the student loan cases or whether it's the border, which he's ignored all the border laws. So it's not even about a policy debate. It's about, do you believe in the rule of law or are you ignoring the rule of law?
3 attorneys generals, Senator Ted Cruz from Texas, and even Speaker of the House Mike Johnson addressed attendees on the importance of election integrity and the founding principles of the Constitution.
President Biden has invited an illegal immigration catastrophe on our country, and we have to step up and secure our elections right now so that we can do our duty and defend not just our core principles, but our Constitution itself.
During the conference, policy differences in between Republicans and Democrats were highlighted, but Speaker of the House Mike Johnson emphasized that American exceptionalism unites most of Americans.
We are the last best hope of man on the earth. Reagan used to remind us of that. He's, of course, quoting Lincoln. What they understood was that we are different, we are exceptional, the greatest nation in the history of the world, the most powerful, most free, most benevolent, the most secure. We're the best for a reason, because we are built on those core principles. We have to maintain them.
This year's Republican National Lawyers Association concluded with a private event where attendees got to meet members of former President Donald Trump's legal team. Reporting from Arlington, Virginia, Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito is facing a storm of controversy. This comes after the New York Times published a photo of a U.S. flag flying upside down outside his home in Virginia. The report says the picture was taken just 3 days before President Biden's inauguration in 2021. The inverted flag became a protest symbol for some Trump supporters who questioned the results of the 2020 election. Alito said his wife displayed the flag in response to a neighbor who used profane language on a yard sign. The neighbor reportedly blamed Mrs. Alito for what happened on January 6th. Several Democratic lawmakers have called on the justice to recuse himself from all cases related to the 2020 election. The Supreme Court is currently weighing 2 cases related to January 6th. The rulings are expected by the end of June. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. In France, a police officer fatally shot an armed man who allegedly set fire to a synagogue. This incident occurs amid a sharp rise in anti-Semitic acts in France. NTD's France correspondent David Vives spoke to a police union spokesperson who says this trend across the country is very worrying.
French police fatally shot an armed man suspected of setting a fire that severely damaged a local synagogue in Rouen, France.
The individual climbed down from the roof and ran towards the police officers with a knife in his hand, aiming to stab or slit their throats. Obviously, we had no other option but to fire in the direction of the individual.
The attack, which took place early Friday, has been classified by French authorities as clearly anti-Semitic. France's Minister of the Interior, Gérald Darmanin, said that there's an explosion of hatred against Jews in the country. Police union spokespersons said this attack is no surprise, as the number of anti-Semitic acts has skyrocketed since October 7th in the country.
The number of anti-Semitic incidents in France in the first quarter was up 300% on last year. I'm terribly worried. It worries me for my French citizens of the Jewish faith. It worries me for my country that we have so many anti-Semitic acts. And it even worries me to see that in Europe, it's spreading just about everywhere.
The fire, allegedly ignited by a Molotov cocktail, caused significant damage to the synagogue's interior. The suspect, an Algerian national, was recently ordered by the court to leave the country after he entered illegally. Mana says there's a feeling that the French justice system is scrambling to find an appropriate response to anti-Semitism.
I have the impression that, despite legal sanctions, this is not enough to stop and calm the ardor of these madmen who, on religious grounds, can attack a synagogue for free, just like that.
This kind of isolated act by an individual who wasn't flagged as dangerous by police services is the most complicated to deal with for policemen, Mana says. The country is still on high alert for terrorist strikes at the moment. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on today, but let's start in golf, where an unusual scene took place this morning at the PGA Championship as PGA star Scottie Scheffler was arrested just outside the venue. What can you tell us about what happened here?
Yeah, such an unusual event. Scheffler is the #1 ranked player in the world. He was on his way to playing the second round of the PGA Championship. Now, this is one of golf's 4 majors, so of course a lot of attention here. Now, here's what's been reported so far. Traffic had been halted early in the morning outside the PGA Championship. This is at the Valhalla Country Club in Louisville, Kentucky, after a man had been struck and killed by a shuttle bus. I mean, this is around 5 a.m. Now, Scheffler had nothing to do with that, but according to an ESPN reporter who witnessed this incident, Scheffler was trying to drive around the crash scene on a median. A police officer instructed him to stop, but he continued to drive. Now, at some point, the officer attached himself to Scheffler's car. Scheffler then stopped his car as he turned into the entrance of the Valhalla Country Club. After a few seconds, he rolled down his window to talk to the officer. The officer then reached into the car, grabbed his arm, and pulled him out of the vehicle. Once he was out, he was placed in handcuffs. Now, he's being charged with second-degree assault of a police officer, which is a felony, along with several other misdemeanor charges. Now, Scheffler released a statement saying he was proceeding as directed by police officers, and there was a big misunderstanding of what he thought he was being asked to do, and that he never intended to disregard any of their instructions. So in any case, it was a very unusual scene.
And on that note, has there been a response by the police? And what about the country club there? Is there any special kind of entrance the players have to follow?
I mean, according to the police incident report, the officer in question was dragged to the ground, suffered, quote, pain, swelling, and abrasions to his wrist and knee after Scheffler's car accelerated. Now, the reports of the officer there stopped Scheffler's car and attempted to give him instructions, but that the subject refused to comply and accelerated forward, dragging the officer to the ground. The officer was then transported to a hospital for evaluation. Meanwhile, Scheffler's attorney also gave a statement saying that Scheffler was unaware of the traffic accident ahead, that had changed the traffic patterns, but that Scheffler had his credential out, as he was instructed to do, to enter the country club. Now, he said the officer who tried to stop Scheffler wasn't part of the regular event traffic detail at the Valhalla Country Club, and that that's where the miscommunication rose. He said, quote, they are allowed to go through, they being the players. That's why they have the credentials and the wave through. Now, this attorney also added that he would cooperate with police and deal with this as it progresses. Now, incredibly, Scheffler was released at 8:40 a.m. His tee time was at 10 a.m. He got there, he played a very good round today, a 5 under 66. It actually vaulted him into 3rd place. So it's pretty amazing his focus with everything that happened that morning.
And now moving to NFL news, the commencement speech given by Chiefs kicker Harrison Butker continues to dominate the news. Have any of Butker's teammates commented on it?
You know, I haven't seen anything from his teammate, but Tevia Hunt, who is the wife of Clark Hunt, who's the CEO and chairman of the Chiefs, actually posted on Instagram something that seemed to be in support of the content of Butker's speech anyway. Now, she said, quote, affirming motherhood and praising your wife, as well as highlighting the sacrifice and dedication it takes to be a mother, is not bigoted. It is empowering to acknowledge that a woman's hard work in raising children is not in vain. End quote. Now, Butker, a devout Catholic, had extolled the value of being a homemaker and the important roles that husband and wives have in raising a family. While speaking at a Catholic college, he's received plenty of criticism, but you can see also here he's received plenty of support as well.
And tonight we have several crucial playoff games between the NHL and NBA. Let's start in Indiana as the Pacers face elimination, down 3-2 to the Knicks. What do they need to do to extend the series?
You know, I would say the biggest key is stopping Jalen Brunson. In the Knicks' 3 wins, which are incident all at home, he's averaged 39 points a game while shooting better than 50% from the floor in each game. In only 2 losses, both in Indiana, he's averaged just 22 points a game and he's shot below 40%. But especially in the fourth quarter, he's been so tough to stop in the fourth. That's where they really have to start. You know, in the NHL, we've got a pair of Game 6s. Florida's at Boston up 3-2. They can move to the next round with a win, where the New York Rangers are waiting. Ditto for Dallas. lost. They're at Colorado, needing a victory to advance. The winner there will face the winner of Vancouver versus Edmonton in the conference finals.
Well, Davis Owens, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tiff.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.